Direction Point! Direction Point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. A lot has happened in the world of pop culture since my last episode a week ago. The coronation has happened. The Eurovision finals have happened. Being in the States, these are not events that have particular personal meaning for me, but I know they're very important to a wide stretch of my audience, and I hope all of you who watched enjoyed. The Eurovision finals did have particular meaning for us Doctor Who fans on both sides of the pond, because during the finals on Saturday was the release of a new trailer for the upcoming Russell T Davies / David Tennant / Catherine Tate mini-season, and we now have titles for the next 3 episodes, all to air in the autumn of 2023. The Star Beast, Wild Blue Yonder, and The Giggle. This appears to be Russell T Davies back in his 2005 to 2009 form, so people who enjoyed that run of the show will almost certainly enjoy the upcoming 3 David Tennant specials. You know we'll be discussing them here and, of course, over on the Trap One podcast when those episodes finally release. This week we have a very, very long interview. My guest this week, once again, is Conrad. Now, there is a theory that you, as a person, are the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Or to put it another way, show me who your friends are, and I'll show you who you are. I spend a lot of time with people on this podcast, a lot of good friends on this show, and the people that I speak to definitely influence me. You really could not ask for a better listener and a better contributor to the show than Conrad. Always a delight to speak to him. Our conversation this week, even with some judicious editing, goes on for about 15 minutes longer than one of my usual interviews, which I try to limit to about an hour. With Conrad, we go for a full 75 minutes, and it is worth every single second of that. Trust me. Going to be a really good discussion about perhaps not one of Doctor Who's best beloved stories from the original run. We are talking, of course, about Meglos, the second story of Season 18, and the Terrance Dicks novelization thereof. The TV serial aired in 1980. The book came out in 1983. It is the last proper Tom Baker novelization, and the last book before a run of 10 straight Peter Davison novelizations. Conrad and I this week are going to play a game of show and tell, and of course, this being an audio-only podcast, you will have to use your imagination a little bit, but I was accompanied by a Meglos prop since the last LI Who convention in November 2022 did feature Meglos toys. I have one on my desk, definitely an important part of my workday, even if it is only Meglos. So Conrad and I have a lot to discuss, and then I am going to read my way through the book for all of you. So, this being a longer episode than usual, let's get to it.
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space, in a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts,
Eric Gulbranson,
Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
Explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse on shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to the Doctor Who Literature podcast.
Well, Conrad, this is the first time that I've had you back on the show since your 20 questions crown was cruelly ripped away from you by one of my other frequent guests. So what I want to do is, before anything else, before pleasantries, before we talk about the book, before I get Smudge out of the laptop camera because she's very fascinated by your headset, before we do anything else, we are going to play a game of 20 questions right now at the beginning of the recording.
What?
I'm going to give you a chance to get your crown back before we do anything else.
That's very, very kind. Thank you so much. I'd love to guess from 60 years worth of television. I'll guess which one it is in 4 guesses. I'm sure that's definitely going to happen. Yes. Guys, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think Cy did it in 7. I, on a mad fluke day, got there in 6. But you're always that sense of like, well, come on. You're just waiting each week for someone to top it. But Mark having got it in 5, to beat that in 4, do you think anyone's going to do it?
Yes, because it's the Wordle principle, right? So everybody who plays Wordle has one word that they use for their first move every single night.
Okay.
And at some point, the word of the day is going to be your opening word. So when my kids started playing Wordle, her first word was always train. She always opened with train because it has the T and the R and the N, all common letters, and it has 2 vowels. And one day, a few months into our Wordle journey, train was the word of the day, and she got it in 1.
Wow.
So by that same principle, whenever Mark was on this show, he would always pick the Visitation as his opener story. So in the off chance that the Visitation was ever it, he was going to get it in 1, and nobody would ever be able to break the record.
Yeah.
So what happened is, when he was on last time, we happened to get the 1980s as the decade, and I said, you have one chance to break Conrad's record, but you have to guess one story from the entire 1980s. And little did I know that his favorite story happens to be Silver Nemesis. Now, we like Mark anyway, even in spite of this clear lapse of judgment.
Do we? We did. I'm not sure now.
Every Doctor Who story is somebody's favorite, even the bad ones. I have a soft spot for the Censorites, heaven knows. So
yeah, we've all got our...
Silver Nemesis is his weakness, and he picked that as his random guess, and that happened to be the story of the week.
I mean, you got to hand it to him. The man's got style. And also but actually, I think this is where the hope is for future pretenders for the crown, is that in his 5 guesses, his first, like you said, his first question was a total wild card. And had he maybe not done that, and he still could have got it in 4. So there is hope, but I don't know. I don't know this will happen today, but we're gonna see what happens.
See, this is the 75. This is episode 75. Now, there've been more than 75 episodes because I do bonuses, etc.
Yeah.
But this is of my regular episodes, is my 71st book with a guest. And I've played 20 questions most of that run. Yeah. Jim Sangster has actually done a spreadsheet for me as to who has played 20 questions and what the result was. But I've been playing this game for so long, it's my most popular game by far, that at some point somebody's going to get it in 1, because I'm not even halfway through the show, right? There's 156 target books, not counting the specials like the season 23s and the companions, all of which I'm covering. So you figure there's 165 books that I'll cover on this show. That's a lot more opportunities to play 20 questions. Somebody's going to have to get it in 1. Now, if they go the methodical route like I did the one time that I played, then I got it in 10, which is fine. That's respectable. But somebody's going to get lucky at some point, and they'll get it in 1. And that might be you today. Who knows?
Who knows? Or maybe I'll beat the AI for the worst score on 20 questions ever, which actually is quite a challenge. Anyway.
I feel a little better about the AI's takeover of humanity, knowing that they can't solve my games.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, my goodness. Righty-ho, here we go.
So I am a Doctor Who story anywhere between 1963 and 2022 from the randomizer.net, a production of Fly Through Entirety. You will have to guess which story I am using a series of 20 yes or no questions. Everybody who has ever played this game has passed, with the exception of ChatGPT. And there was one guest who passed in 19 questions with a lot of help from yours truly. And I won't say who he was, but his name rhymes with Bill Evenson. So, Conrad, this is your chance to break Mark's record and get your crown back.
Okay. Or break the 20 record. I've done the crown now. I want the other end. So let's embrace the loser. No, let's do it. Here we go. My first question is, are you a classic? Are you from the classic era of Doctor Who?
I am not from the classic era. Now, that's good. That's a positive development because it cuts out more than half the show.
It is a positive development, but I know new Doctor Who a lot less. So here we go. Right, how should we do this? Is it a Stephen Moffat showrunner episode? Is he the showrunner of this?
No, it is not Stephen Moffat, and that knocks out about 1/3 of what's left.
Okay.
So now you are down to about 7 seasons of the new series, maybe 8 if you count the specials, which of course are eligible for selection. So somewhere in those 7 or 8 seasons is your answer, and you have 18 questions to go. Plenty of time to put Mark in the rearview mirror.
Is Christopher Eccleston the Doctor?
No, Christopher Eccleston is not the Doctor.
Okay.
That only knocks out 1 season, so now we are at question 4.
So I'm going to ask, is it a David Tennant story?
Yes, it is a David Tennant story. That's question 4. Now, this is your chance to get half of the crown back by tying Mark.
Half a crown? What can you buy with that? Okay, gosh, I haven't watched these for such a long time. I think I might try and break it down by... is Rose the companion in the story, or is Rose in this story?
Yes, Rose is in this story.
Does this story have a recurring villain in it?
It does, and I think that's question 6, so you're not going to be champion, but you are on your way.
Okay, is it... I just don't know how to break this down.
Different people have different strategies. When Graham Burke tried this game the first time, he broke it down season by season. Others break it down by, multi-part story or one-part story. Jim Sangster had the is it in 4:3 aspect ratio question, which...
I love that. He should have got a prize just for that. Okay, all right. Is it a Dalek story?
It is not a Dalek story. I think we're at question 8 now.
Is it a Cyberman story? I'm now just crashing around.
Not a Cyberman story. Question 9.
With a recurring villain.
I'll give you another hint of that. It is a returning villain, but it is not one of the obvious returning villains. If you make a list of every recurring villain who is on the new series more than once, this may be one of the last things that people guess, but it is a returning villain.
Let me think. Oh gosh, is it a two-parter?
It is not a two-parter. It is a one-part story.
Well, maybe I'll just go through it. Is it New Earth?
It is not New Earth. I will tell you that you're close, but it is not New Earth.
Is it Gridlock?
It is not Gridlock.
I wondered if there was a... I know that's a Martha story, isn't it? Anyway, I'm so sorry.
It's Martha. It does have a returning villain, the Macra, but no, it is not.
No.
It's not a Rose story.
Okay.
I think you're at question 12. I want to give you a do-over because you asked a non-Rose story, so we're at question 11 again.
Bless you for that. I've got my eyes on this on the AI prize. I tell you, I think I might get there. And now I'm just trying to remember stories with a minute. That's terrible, isn't it? God, I'm drawing a complete blank. I can think of lots of stories, but I can't think of any with a returning villain.
You can break it down methodically if you want. You can go season by season or writer by writer. But we do want to break the gridlock, so to speak.
Yeah.
Even though gridlock is not the answer.
I reckon it's... Is it from season 2?
Yes, it is part of the season 2 production blocks.
It would help if I'd watched season 2 more recently, which I haven't.
Or if you had in front of you a list of all of season 2.
Well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe I should just do that.
There are probably about as many questions remaining as eligible one-part stories in season 2. I think we're going to be at question 12 now.
Yeah, here we go. So it's a season... Hang on. It's a season 2 story with... It's not New Earth.
Just to define the boundaries, season 2 begins with the Christmas special and it ends with Doomsday.
Yeah, but it's not a Daleks or Cyberman story. Correct.
And it's also not a two-parter, so that knocks out the two-part Cyberman stories.
Doesn't that leave that? I think. Sorry, this isn't a question. I'm just thinking out loud. That leaves me with like Fear Her, Love and Monsters, Idiot's Lantern, Girl in the Fireplace, School Reunion, Tooth and Claw. And, okay, so one of these I'm probably looking at a returning villain.
Now, for example, Girl in the Fireplace does have a returning villain because the Clockwork Man later shows up in a Stephen Moffat story.
Okay.
There are other stories that have, again, not the classic Dalek, Cyberman, Sontaras, but they have villains that were shown more than once. That would rule out Idiot's Lantern. I don't think Magpie
Yeah.
Electronics counts as a returning
And
villain,
Love
even
and
though
Monsters doesn't. Although Love and Monsters does have montage clips of old monsters, but I don't think we're calling that. We're not calling Fear her. I mean, so Impossible Planet Satan Pit. I mean, are the Ood villains? Is the devil the villain? These aren't questions I'm asking. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm properly stuck, like genuinely, like scratching my head to actually think about what it is. So I'm going to say, is it part of the Impossible Planet Satan Pit two-parter?
again, this is not a two-part story, so I'm going to rule that one out.
Sorry, I'm now asking dumb questions. I wish I had artificial intelligence right now because my real intelligence isn't doing it. Okay, so it's not New Earth. It's not Tooth and Claw, which has werewolves in it.
See, what you're doing is you're going through season 2 in order, but you're not starting with the first story of season 2.
Which is the Christmas Invasion.
Yes.
Which has a returning villain in it. Does it have a returning villain? It's got the Sycorax in it.
It also has the trumpet players who
I was
show
going to
up
say,
again
are
and
you
again.
going to say that? So Robot Santas are the recurring villain.
Yes.
Okay, is it the Christmas Invasion?
It is the Christmas Invasion.
Okay, wow, that was hard. That was really hard. Mainly because I haven't watched this for a long time. Wow, the Christmas Invasion and the returning villain with the Christmas Santas. Goodness me, that was an epic struggle.
So you asked the question, is it a returning villain? And yes,
I
it does
did.
have, in a technical set, remember, I'm a lawyer by day, that is a technicality. Yes, it does have a returning villain in its first appearance, but it will be a returning villain.
Amazing. The return of Christmas. Goodness me. Well, I'll obviously have to dig those out. I can rewatch them.
And even though it's a season 2 story, it's the very beginning of most folks think season 2 starts with New Earth. It does not. It's the first story of season 2 on the DVDs.
Oh, I was caught doubly out. Goodness me. Oh, for artificial intelligence. That's what I want for Christmas next year is artificial intelligence installed in my brain. Goodness me.
That would make you a Cyberman.
That'll do. I'll take it. Woo! Anyway, that was a struggle, but thank you so much for bearing with me.
Well, I was hoping that you would get your crown back. That'll have to happen next time, but you did not fail, so that's the good news.
Well, I'll take it.
And it's been a while since I've had you back on the show. I think the last time that you were here with us was all the way back for the Time Warrior, which was episode 42. That was more than half a year ago. So what have you been up to since the last time that we've spoken on camera?
Oh, goodness me. Well, I think this year has been quite thin on the ground in terms of Doctor Who podcasts, but I did a podcast on a really fantastic podcast called Robots in Your Eyes recently, which is Stephen Alexander. And
he has been on this show, although I have not been on his.
He has indeed. And Jason Thompson, and it's a brilliant podcast about a particular era of cartoons. They mainly focus on Transformers, but they also look at other cartoons from the 80s, 70s, 90s, around there. So I was on their podcast talking about Batman 77, which is a cartoon I remember from my childhood, the Filmation one with Batmite in it. That was a challenge. But it's enormous fun, and I thoroughly recommend you listen to it. So you'll find it on Twitter at Robots in Eyes, and I thoroughly recommend you listen to that. And then I think next up is Trap 1. We are doing another audio annual. The audio annual gang is back together. So that's me, Mark, Sai, and Denise. And we will be reviewing, and I'm so excited about this, the Amazing World of Doctor Who annual, which is a bit of an oddity from the 70s, as it was a promotional annual to tie in with this T-card promotion from Doctor Who that's very dear to my heart. The stories are barking mad, but there's a lot of there's just joy and beauty in that. I actually sent Mark a copy of the annual, and he just went, "Oh, it's so 70s." And I was like, thanks. I was like sending it to him, like, this is it. This is real Doctor Who. I'm so passionate about it. Anyway, there you go. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Mark is too young. Mark missed the 70s. You and I lived through most of the 70s. We have a much
Yeah.
better sense of having survived it.
Yes, this is true. But he is younger, sharper, and we love / hate Mark. I love to hate Mark.
I started watching cartoons in the 70s, and I by and large stopped by the early 80s. So most of my cartoons are the reruns from the late 60s and early 70s, and then all your classic late 70s Saturday morning US cartoons.
Yeah.
So I have an encyclopedic knowledge of 70s cartoons. Anything after 1983, because I think the last cartoon that I watched regularly in a non-ironic way would have been He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
That's very much in this podcast wheelhouse. They're very much about that particular era of it. And when I was on, it was interesting to talk about the difference between 70s and 80s cartoons. And I mistakenly thought the real difference was the advent of Star Wars sort of just changed everything and the commercialization of it. But actually, Stephen told me it was sort of the Reagan administration came in and said you don't have to have kind of wholesome morals at the end of your story, and you can sell as many bloody toys as you want. These can basically be long toy adverts, and that was the huge difference. So it's
Because 1983, when I get home from school, that was my first year as a latchkey kid. I would get home from school, immediately put on the television. So you would have Inspector Gadget, which always ended with Don Adams turning right to the camera and giving you a moral.
nice.
And then right after that was He-Man, Masters of the Universe, which always ended with Adam, Prince of Eternia, turning to the camera and giving you a moral.
Nice.
And after that year, that was when the morals kind of stopped.
Yeah. Wow. The year the morals stopped. Wow. There we go. Fun times. But yes, I thoroughly urge anyone who hasn't listened to it to sign up. It's like it's a niche one, but they're getting more people on to do different types of cartoons, sort of fleshing it out. So Robots in Your Eyes is my big plug for today.
Well, Steve is going to be back on this show before too much longer goes by, so I'm going to have to pitch getting on his show since he's already been on mine, and I'm going to have to bring him out of his comfort zone. I'm going to have to pitch him Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space, which was my introduction to science fiction by and large, not counting Star Wars.
All right. Okay. Well, Stephen's your man to talk to about that, either on yours or on his. That sounds good. That sounds good.
I am always there for the Pussycats in Outer Space because you take an Archie Comics property, which has a long shelf life because Josie keeps turning up in the CW Archie Comics Universe TV series. Riverdale, Sabrina, Katie Keene. But they take the show and they put it in a rocket ship and they spend a year in outer space. And every week it's a bonkers sci-fi planet with a bonkers monster. And they always stop for a rock and roll montage.
Wow. Are we going to stop for a rock and roll montage during this episode, mate? That would be fun.
We are going to stop for a rock and roll montage right now.
Okay, let's do it. Okay.
Josie in outer space, pussycats are all in place. Setting off on another chase, on the Milky Way, when they're grooving, who can say? Buckle up your seatbelts, they could be in orbit in the stars, on a spooky planet, maybe Mars. There's no way of knowing when they're grooving way above the atmosphere, trying to get back to here. They're blasting on now, Josie's on a rocket ride.
And our musical interlude has now concluded. And Conrad, again, you haven't been back on this show in a while, but I hope you are still getting a chance to listen to us week in and week out.
I certainly am. Congratulations on the podcast, which just grows from strength to strength. I particularly enjoyed hearing all of the season 18 reviews because I'm a big season 18 fan, as we'll find out. And I've got, we've all got our how we listen to our podcast. And for me, I've got a ritual. Sunday night, this is too much information. Sunday night is my bath night. And so my other half makes dinner. I have a big, long, luxurious bath, and I put on and listen to Doctor Who Literature podcast every Sunday, never miss it. And I love it. It's so interesting. And I haven't read all of these books. So I get to learn about the books, but learn so much about the different stories as well. And your guests are spectacular. I love it. And we were talking earlier, I asked you about where your listeners are from around the world. And the breakdown was kind of interesting.
You made a really interesting point because in the lower left-hand corner of the back cover of all the targets are the price points for all the countries where targets are sold. So I have the 1984 third printing of Meglos, and it's got 3 countries: UK, US, Australia. But this is an early 1984 reprint. Last week's book, Time Flight, I had as a later 1984 reprint, and you can tell because the colored Target logo becomes the disappointing monochrome Target logo. And on the back of Time Flight, you had 5 countries: UK, US, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. And you are the one who pointed out that my top 5 countries by listeners are the same 5 countries to which Target books were sold in the 1980s.
Some spooky synchronicity happening there. It's amazing. Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's so nice to hear. You just think about all these people listening to all over the world. So it was me in my bath in wet UK. And then I know someone goes for a walk in Singapore and listens to them going for a walk. I think one of your listeners last week said they always listen to it driving to work. I just love that. It's fantastic. So thank you to all your guests so far because they've been blinking fabulous.
I am bringing in my listeners one mode of transportation at a time.
Excellent.
And yes, season 18. So when did you first watch season 18? Were you watching it in the wild as these stories go out, 1980, 81?
Yeah. So my, I was 4 when Genesis of the Daleks and all of that stuff came out. So I count myself very lucky that when I first saw Doctor Who, it was Tom Baker, Liz Sladen, Genesis, Pyramids, Ark in Space, Zygons, all that kind of stuff. So that was very much my era, and I never missed an episode afterwards. But I was 9 when season 18 came out, and although I was so fond of my Doctor Who, how I liked it, season 18 was so fascinating and so new, and I was tipping between 9 and 10. It was 1980, and lots of stuff kind of shifted. I've got a lot to say about it later down the track, but yeah, I watched it in the wild, and it was so exciting. And so it wasn't just new, like Doctor Who is often new, but I think it captured newness and change in a way that very few seasons have done quite like this. So yeah, it seems to be a fan maker of a season. I think a lot of people cite their really crystallizing into a fan over this season. And I think it's I think that's something like your experience, right?
I came in properly during season 20, and it was all those continuity references that drew me in because my first proper episode, Arc of Infinity Part 2, features 2 returning villains, both Barusa, who wasn't a villain yet, and Omega. Don't forget Omega.
Who could?
And then you have the Black Guardian returning in the Modern Undead trilogy. You have the Master returning in King's Demons. And then that culminates. My PBS station showed the 4-part edit of 5 Doctors over 4 nights. So I was treating it as a regular story and not a 90-minute movie. It was a long time before I knew that it was a 90-minute movie in the first place.
Yeah.
I thought those cliffhangers were as scripted rather than arbitrary post-production choices for the syndicated market. And of course, 5 Doctors, which is coming up on this show real soon. You have everything. It was my first Dalek story, my first Cyberman story, my first Yeti story.
Wow.
So all that stuff jazzed me up. And by the time you get to Resurrection of the Daleks in season 21, and that's not coming up on this show until the bitter end, when I do the new Target novelizations from the 21st century, when the Doctor says that he had a chance to destroy the Daleks at their inception, I was like, I want to see that story. And luckily, it cycled around again very soon because after season 21, my channel looped back to season 12, and I was able to see Genesis of the Daleks a month or so later. Yeah. So for me, the Peter Howell opening theme is my ultimate adrenaline rush. I know I've said that before. Peter Davison is my Doctor. Tegan, Nyssa, and Turlough are my companions. But my first novelization, which I borrowed from a friend at school, was Logopolis, which I mentioned when I came up with this show with John
that was
Blum
a smashing episode. That was a cracking episode.
I could probably recite the entire novelization from memory at this point because I've read it so many times and I have so much of that committed to memory that's why my audio essay for Logopolis was, my favorite line from each chapter. There are very few books that I can do that for, but Logopolis is one of them. And then I went through the Tom Baker era the long way because it was my PBS station doing one 25-minute episode a night, starting in February, ending in December 1985. And I was not expecting that you were going to have the changeover from the Bernard Lodge title sequence to the Sid Sutton title sequence at Leisure. I thought Leisure Hive would have been the same old, Dayglow 70s groovy opening. I was not expecting my opening credits from the Peter Davison era to come charging back with Tom Baker's face in the Starfield instead of Petey's. So just that 90-second opening pan of Brighton, and I only knew about Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. I did not know there was a second Brighton in the UK.
Yeah.
Bless your hearts. That was my introduction to the other Brighton. So I was just literally floating off the floor when I saw that for the first time. And at that point, I was hooked. And every story from season 18, with one exception, is incredible. Leisure Hive, amazing. Full Circle, amazing.
Sublime. That's one of my favorite all-time Doctor Who stories.
State of Decay is as scary as Doctor Who gets. Warrior's Gate took me a while to get, but now I am of the right age.
Yeah.
That's not really a story for 12-year-olds, but it is a story for everybody else.
Right.
Keeper of Traken is gorgeous. I know it's not doing so great in the rankings, but I think it's phenomenal. And Logopolis, again, if I had one story to save on a desert island, that would be the one that I could watch over and over again.
Now, Jason, it may take me a while to track down a 20 questions question, but I did note, my keen eye spotted that you missed one out there off your list. There's one missing.
I mentioned every story from season 18. Let's go through it
something-
again.
There's something.
I've mentioned Leisure Hive.
Yeah.
I've mentioned Full Circle.
Okay, now we're back up now. Oh, now back up, because there is something in between. There is something we need to get down to now, and it is the last Zolfathuran himself, Meglos. Here we go. We've got to do it. And today's the day. We're doing this. It's the last. This is the last novelization of the last season 18 novelization. So this is
not only that, but it is the last Tom Baker novelization full stop until the 21st century, unless you include Doctor Who and the Pescatons, which is a Tom Baker novelization of a record album written by a guy who only knew the Second Doctor and was writing Tom Baker as if Tom Baker were Patrick Troughton.
Nice. Are you going to do that novelization at some point?
I am, because it is a Target book with a number. And that is going to be episode number 153, in between Battlefield and Power of the Daleks.
Excellent. But we're here. We're doing it. We're talking about Meglos. We're doing this now.
Confession time.
Come on.
When I was 12, I loved Meglos because it is the perfect story for a 12-year-old. Every actor in that piece is pitching their performance at the 12-year-old. And on that level, it's glorious. However, now that I'm a few years past age 12, I need a little bit more than whimsical, over-the-top performances. That's kind of where Meglos makes me wish I was 12 again, because I'll never be able to appreciate it as much as I did in 1985. How about you?
Yeah, I think at the time I was just wrapped up in the whole season, and I just took, you just take it on face value and enjoy it. It didn't stick in the memory quite as much, and I was quickly aware that it wasn't one that really held my attention or really wowed me like Full Circle or Logopolis or something like that. Yeah, and I think we can get sort of defensive and apologetic about Doctor Who, but like this is it's a turkey. It's in the States I believe you call it a lemon. You call it, like, if someone sells you a Duff car, that car's a bit of a lemon. Okay, or
an Edsel, which was the car that generated the lemon laws. Yes.
Okay, so it's this one is it's easily the weakest of season 18. I have to say, and it's obviously languishes at the bottom of the polls and all that kind of stuff. And I just think it's fair. It's a fairly, what we've got here is a good old fashioned, not well written, not well directed, not well produced. Largely because a new producer, a new script editor come in, and they don't have any overflow of scripts from last season, so it's a scramble to find a script. They've got new writers. Terence Dudley's directing. I'm saying no more about that. It has to be the cheap one. So it's got an awful lot against it. It's very, very hard under those conditions to make great TV under those conditions.
I am now, and I know a few minutes ago we joked that this story is not part of season 18 at all, but I'm going to throw at you a few points in defense of Meglos, because
Yeah,
every story deserves a defense.
absolutely.
Every story has some redeeming quality about it. This is a story that has Lalla Ward and K9. That's, again, I came in with Tiga, Anissa, and Turlo. I love those three, even though Turlo and Anissa hardly ever get any scenes together in their two serials. But the Fourth Doctor and Romana and K9, the John Leeson K9, are such an iconic team, and they're having so much fun. And this is before Eric Sayward comes in and decides that everybody has to hate each other. This is just a magical trio, and they don't get out of the TARDIS until late in part 2. And the chronic hysteresis is fun. Doesn't make any sense, but it's fun, right?
Hugely. I have to say, although I've started on calling a spade, I actually think there are some great things in this story. I think you've got these new writers. So we've got John Flanagan and Andrew McCulloch, who are the Bob Baker and Dave Martin of this season, bringing a story, bringing some big ideas that are not glued together, and for whatever reason, it doesn't get glued together. So it's not so much there are plot holes; it's just that there are disparate chunks of some great ideas in there, but it just doesn't cohere at any stage. And thematically, things just don't quite work. Things feel like things feel like a draft. But there are some fantastic ideas in there, and you've hit upon one of my very, very favourites. The chronic hysteresis is absolutely fantastic, and as a kid, I loved that. I think that was reenacting in the playground time.
Let's put it to the test. Do you want to be Romana or do you want to be the Fourth Doctor?
I'd have been K9 in that situation. Just a broken person.
Well, we're going to reenact the chronic hysteresis sequence from memory right now.
Oh no, I can't. What are you trying to do to me? I can't. It's not.
Wait a minute. You just lean back and you're wearing a K9 shirt. You're wearing a K9 T-shirt.
I'm wearing a K9 T-shirt here. I know, isn't that cool? Yeah, no,
brilliant.
I think, but it is. I think it's genuinely brilliant. I mean, and this is where it was in the script. They've just hit upon something. They've tried their best to learn how to write Doctor Who, which is very tricky. But they've done it kind of quite generically. This whole idea of there's the Daons and the Savants. Science and magic. It's like that's really first draft stuff. Doctor Who's done science and magic before, but it's done it in a much more sophisticated, interesting way. And originally, the chronic hysteresis, it was just called a time loop. And even though you'd have got the same action, if they're like, Doctor was stuck in a time loop, that's quite boring. Christopher H. Bidmead, you have to always say his full name, Christopher Hamilton Bidmead,
yes,
comes in and calling it a chronic hysteresis. It's so catchy. It's so nice to say. It sounds scientific. And I think actually, I looked it up, and a hysteresis is actually a thing. I think it's a concept they use in physics or economics. Both fields I know nothing about. But basically, it's a lag of some sort. And so it's a chronic hysteresis, a chronic hysteretic loop. It's so pleasing to say, and I never forgot that. So having seen that once as a kid, I love the chronic hysteresis. I think that and the image of a cactus and Tom in his cactoid self are the two of the strongest images of the story. Love it.
And that brings us to our first show and tell. And again, you and I are speaking on video. Only the audio is going out. But I want to show you what I got at the last Li Who in November 2022. Because ever since the pandemic, when Li Who has been going down to half size, every convention has had a theme episode. So in 2021, it was Li Who Presents Time Flight. In 2022, it was Li Who Presents Meglos 2022, a succulent soiree. And I have for you a prop that I took from the Li Who main stage.
So I'll describe to the listeners, I'm seeing a small plant pot, and it's got a nice sort of label on it with slightly Mexican art on it. And out of the top is, looking suspiciously like plastic, a green cactus. So let me get this straight. They themed a convention around Meglos and gave you all a free plastic cactus.
They themed a convention around Meglos. Now, not everybody got a cactus. This happened to be a prop, and I happened to liberate the prop on the very last night of the convention.
We're talking theft, okay.
No, there was a little bit of please have this from one of the organizers. I won't say
Okay.
which one to keep her out of trouble, Irene, but
Okay.
I did get this lovely succulent plastic
Amazing.
cactus. Now this lives on my work desk, which is on the other side of the room from where I'm recording now. So anytime I'm at work, I do have a Meglos on my desk.
That is fantastic. And you've reminded me of something. When I was a kid, I got given the first plant I ever owned. I was given a cactus because they thought, well, you don't have to water it; it'll be fine. And so, of course, I called it Meglos. And do you remember those? I think in the UK we call them Dymo tape. In the US, I think it's label makers, where you basically put in this black tape and you punch letters into it. I remember typing its letters Meglos and had a little name stuck to it. And so I also had a cactus called Meglos. So already it's giving the love.
My father got a label maker for I think Father's Day. It must have been 1981, and for the next year it was red tape, and when you punched it, it formed white letters.
Yes.
And there was sort of there was a disc in the holster of the gun that had the letters in it,
Oh,
and everything for the next year had a telltale red label with white letters sticking up, and that was
love
our
it.
label maker.
That's it. That's it. Well, I can still see the letters Meglos stuck on my cactus. So we've both got little plastic cactus each. But I think that's the chronic hysteresis is genius. It's played really well, and I think the ending of it, the way they get out of it, it's a bit magic, but that's fine. It's sort of they repeat it, but then Lalaward sells it by saying phase cancellation. I'm like, of course, chronic hysteresis, phase cancellation. You just repeat it, it throws it out of the loop. That'll do as a scientific explanation. I'll buy it. So I think that's glorious. The cactus is glorious, and I think although it's not explained properly in the TV series what Meglos actually is. The image is really arresting, particularly like with the Earthling, but particularly Tom, and as in this cactus, and also coming off the back of Leisure Hive. Although it wasn't deliberate, what you've got is two stories in which the Doctor quite sort of isn't himself, and it's like with the whole theme of the season and the impending doom of the Fourth Doctor, it's sort of like the program's trying to shake him off, or his body's sort of not quite sitting with himself. It's just, I don't know, there's something. It's a fantastic image, I think.
And I'll mention this on the other half of the program when I do my essay about the book, but there's a lot of surface similarities in the plot with the plot of Logopolis. And I'll leave you in suspense until the other half of the program, which you will hear on Sunday night in the bath.
Thank you.
But you can see Christopher H. Bidmead putting themes in some of these sorry half-written scripts that he's been given. So there are some plot points between Meglos and Logopolis in common, even though one has the unfortunate image of a crash zoom on a soggy cactus in a pot, and that's your big scare moment. There's nothing quite so kitschy in Logopolis, but there are some similarities. And yeah, he also talks about baryon multiplication twice when talking about the atomic weight of the dodecahedron. He talks about the atomic weight in the first place. He sprinkles a lot of scientific jargon in here, which makes you feel smarter as the audience, and it's better than just talking about silly technobabble words.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the crash zoom on the cactus. That a ridiculous image, but it coincides with this incredible sound that Paddy Kingsland wrote the first. So I think Peter Howell was ill, so Paddy Kingsland wrote episode 1's music, and Peter Howell picked up 2 to 3, 2 to 4. But he carried on using this particular noise. That if anyone out there who had Doctor Who the music album from I think 1983, there was you'd hear the Sea Devils score burbling away for a while, and that would drive you a bit nuts, and then it went really quiet, and there was this atmos, this kind of like spooky atmos music, which is, as it turns out, is the background sort of atmos to Zolfathura, and you'd kind of like crane your ear in really closely to your headphones to strain to listen, and then this sound would come in.
You're right. When I was in law school, I played over and over again. I forget what it was. I think it was the 25th anniversary compact disc, and that had the Sea Devils.
Yes,
it had the musical suite from Keeper of Traken, including the dance number.
Love it.
It had Leisure Hive, the musical suite, which is amazing. It had the musical suite from Caves of Androzani. And whenever they got to the regeneration music, I would shiver because I would hear that cue. I
Yeah,
don't recall if the Meglos sting is on that 25th anniversary disc. I don't think it is because it doesn't quite ring a bell.
yeah, you'd know it if you heard it. Like, what is that sound like? I don't know how they're making it. I don't know what it is. It sounds horrible. It's just it's obviously percussive, but it sounds spiky. It sounds slightly insectoid. It's deeply alarming. It probably just disturbed any animals you've got in the house. It's a fantastic sound. So I love that. So that's another. I think for me, the chronic hysteresis is great. The image of this cactus and cactoid Tom is fantastic.
And let's talk about some other high points in the story. I'll first ask you a question. We had a similar discussion on this show a while back, talking about the second Doctor era. Who is the best? And it's human villains that set Doctor Who apart. Most monster movies have a monster. Doctor Who does have monsters, but it also has human villains because a human villain is easier to realize than
Right.
a performer standing in a latex costume under very hot studio lights, sweating out literally boots full of perspiration. So Doctor Who has a great sideline in humanoid villains. So in the second Doctor era, for example, you have the War Chief, you have the Security Chief, you have Tobias Vaughn. Maybe the best human villain of the Patrick Troughton era is Patrick Troughton as Salamander.
Right.
By the same token, you have some memorable human villains throughout the Tom Baker era. You have, for example, you have Scaroth, for example, from City
Yeah.
of Death. Julian Glover gives one of the great human performances ever. You have Sutek, who's, kind of a performer and a costume, but he gives a great voice. Sutek is a great humanoid type villain. Marcus Scarman in the same story. You have Count Grendel in Androids of Tara as an incredible humanoid villain. Where do you put Tom Baker as one of the best villains of the Tom Baker era? Because Tom Baker as Meglos in this story, isn't he terrific?
Yeah, he is. It's funny. I never think of him as in those terms. Isn't that interesting? It never occurs to me. It's like because that's interesting because Meglos is almost sort of on its own. He is well up there if you're going to do that because he's fantastic. Cactus Meglos Doctor is fantastic. It's disturbing, and also he gets to do it with the cactoid skin on, and he does that brilliant wrestling with the
yes.
in a human trying to get out, which is fantastic. You can almost imagine Peter Davison trying to sort of burst out of him. He's like, not yet, back in you go. But then also when he's being just he's just Tom, but he's possessed by Meglos. Like they give you a couple of musical cues, but generally it's not hard to keep up with Who's Who, if you pardon the pun that Tom put in there. It's fantastic. Like he can turn on a hairpin. He's doing enough of an imitation of the Doctor, so there is a veneer of the Fourth Doctor, but it's absolutely brilliant. It's a truly brilliant performance. So yeah, very, very high up.
But why should I lead you out of the city, Doctor?
Well, precisely because I'm not the Doctor.
Then who are you?
I am Meglos! Last Sulphur-Thorin.
So that's an example of Tom Baker's villain acting at his best. And speaking of villains, returning famously to the show for the first time since 1965 is everyone loves Barbara Wright. Everyone loves Jacqueline Hill. She comes back in what is potentially a thankless role. She's playing an antagonist. She's killed off a little too early in part 4. How awesome is Jacqueline Hill in this story getting into it as the evil high priestess with lines like, "It descended from the heavens"?
Wow. She gives it. It's so lovely to see her again. I mean, she is one of the greatest things that ever happened to Doctor Who and will ever happen to Doctor Who. So it's lovely to see her back. She gives it her all. It's a tough role, and God knows what the actual, the production of the thing was like. Probably rushed and under-rehearsed. But she does a great job. It's a shame that... the ending that she's killed off at all, but it's so rushed and badly directed in a battle scene that goes for nothing. And in a story that is like hugely underwritten and underran. So I think episode 3, if you take off the credits, if you take off the padding, if you take off the recap, there's only 12 minutes of actual original material in series 3, in episode 3, and there are only 16 minutes of actual original material in episode 4. So for a thing that's really, really underrun, they've added a lot of padding, but they've cut or not put in some really essential stuff. So, for instance, Lexa was supposed to realise or have a realisation that the Savants were right all along, and had the sacrifice was her sacrifice at the end was supposed to be a much bigger moment. Similarly, Zaster had a key moment where he finally stepped up, took charge, and made a decision. So these big turning points that you needed, along with a lot of explanations in this story that, like, what is Meglos? Like, why does he need an Earthling? Where did the dodecahedron come from? All these, how did it get to Tygella? What's going on? Like, so you get a lot of padding, like the going around in circles, the anti-rotation of the planet, all this sort of stuff. But you don't get the really good stuff. So it's wonderful to see Jacqueline Hill in it. She's fantastic in it. But it always makes me feel a little bit sad, I think.
Now, Terrence, writing the novelization, clearly hated the story, clearly thought the scripts were garbage. I'll talk about this a little more on the other half of the break, but he waits a very long time before getting to any actual television scene. He gives us a lot of throat clearing at the beginning because he's writing what he wants to write and not the unfortunate soggy script that he was assigned. So he does his best. He adds some scenes, he adds some motivations, he changes some moments around. And this is not just him adapting a shooting script as is, adding a couple of jokes. This is him rethinking the story and putting in stuff that is not there because he realizes that from a dramaturgical standpoint, it has to be there. So he's trying to salvage a lot of this stuff, and he seems to enjoy the science versus religion aspect of the Savants and the Dions. He gets some good lines in there when adapting that material, and he gives an extra beat to Jacqueline Hill's character's death, so it's not quite as meaningless as it is on television. But even so, I'm going to read off in the other half of the show the list of all the negative adjectives that he inserts into the text to show you how much he hates this thing. It is just a long string of insults embedded into the novelization.
Oh my goodness.
The same way that the Android Invasion novelization ends with the line, "The Android Invasion was over," which is him breathing a sigh of relief that he's done. But in the same way in Meglos, he is just, every negative word he can think of is thrown into the book.
Bless him. He does come to the rescue of the book several times, though. And I noticed I think it's chapter 11, there's only 12 chapters in it. There's a whole thing where he just explains all the things that aren't explained, literally in order. Those questions I just asked, he explains what Meglos is, what a Zolfathurin is, because in the program it's muddled. Is it a cactus? Is it a shapeshifter? Is it a blob? Is it a thing that operates on a light wave? What is it? He just literally goes through and has an exposition scene where he info dumps, but it was kind of really useful answers to all of these questions, exactly what the plot was, the Earthling was, how the dodecahedron got about, and he does some nice things. Like, I agree with the Savants. Like, one of the terrible things about this rushed production is those bloody awful wigs on those poor people. They're terrible. But this is like where Terrence can, and it's a fairly you'll cover this in the essay, but it's a fairly efficient novel, as you'd expect, which just sort of clicks through the action. But there's a little detail which I really liked. He talked about the Savants, and he says they've got blonde hair, trimmed short, neatly brushed. Their enemies said they all looked and thought alike. And this is before you know anything about them. And he's taken this ridiculous thing of like their terrible wigs, but also says, so you know that they've got enemies, you know that they are uniform, and you know that there's their weakness might be that they're all too similar and they all thought alike. So it just tells you an awful lot in like one sentence. And so he does repair work, because he sees the threads that are rapidly falling apart and he mends them when they break. That's
to coin a phrase.
To coin a phrase, which is another thread. It was funny when I was actually listening in the bath, obviously, to Logopolis the other week, and you played a clip to illustrate Anthony Ainley's Master, and the line you played was something about it's the gadget he's holding. Sorry, I can't remember what it is. You'll know this, you know, word for word. But he talks about the thread, and I think like there's a moment where he says, "Oh, the whole universe, something," and it's something on a thread, and if this thread slips or breaks, and it just reminded me of this. It's accidental, but like it was one of those things. Like, well, there's a thread of the universe right there, and it's. I think this is Chris Bidmead's kind of. Once you start to like fire off these ideas, your imagination starts to fill things in. Like even with the chronic hysteresis, when Romana Ladawar does this gorgeous repetition of the phrase "lush, aggressive vegetation," and she says it beautifully the first time, but when she says it again, she slightly says it in quote marks, like she's enjoying saying it. And even just that little repetition just echoes that chronic hysteresis. You know, not intentional, but there's enough something in this story. There's enough that I think that it's part of season 18. Like it does. That's what rescues, if anything, rescues this story. It's the fact that it is part of this bigger story, so you can see little connections. And I have to say, this very cool connection. So I mentioned it was written by John Flanagan and Andrew McCulloch, and they wrote this in Andrew's flat when they were writing this story. Not literally while they were writing it, but at the same time, there was a knock on the door. And it was production assistant Margot Hayhoe who knocked on the door and said, I'm just looking, this apartment would be absolutely perfect for a television program I've got coming up. I'm making Doctor Who. And what we need is the front door to an apartment that a young air hostess leaves to get in a car to go off on her new job. And so Tegan's flat in Logopolis is the flat in which Meglos was written by these two writers. So there is some very weird cosmic alignment happening in this story.
Wait, so did Margot Hayhoe realize that she was knocking on the door of two guys who were working for the show under contract at that very minute?
No, I think this is a coincidence.
Of all the doors
in
right? All the streets of all the city, they had to knock on theirs.
Yeah, how, like, isn't that wild? So there's some, like, yeah, Meglos is what it is. It's one of those rushed productions that's, you know, new writers who don't quite know what they're doing, a whole new team. It's a cheap one. The direction's not on point. So yeah, this is the sort of shambolic one of the season. But I think almost the worst thing I can say about it is that it almost feels like a season 17 story. It wouldn't look out of place between Nightmare of Eden, which I love, by the way, and Horns of Nimon, which I hate, by the way.
This is a Horns of Nimon house. You can't.
Yeah, I know.
Attitude.
This is one of those things that Horns of Nimon. The thing is, this is where like Horns of Nimon is a duffer, but it's got that. It's got enough outrageous, audacious camp to give it entertainment value, which Meglos doesn't quite have. But I have to say, this is. But yeah, I think it's. Season 18, being part of season 18 is what saves it. And I think maybe what doesn't quite save it is the moments where it feels a bit season 17. It's got, and I can tell those writers are doing stuff that's because Chris Bidmead, to his credit, was trying to find new writers wherever he could. And he found these guys writing a sort of anti-Thatcher satire play somewhere. So he brought them in, but that was very much not where John Nathan Turner was going. So a lot of the jokes he was working against, that kind of Douglas Adams, Monty Python quoting undergraduate humour that Nathan Turner was really working against. And some of that, it makes it into the script, like this, you know, the JNT hated that Brotadak anagram of bad actor. You know, he hated that kind of in-joke.
But season 18 is full of anagrams, and that's largely the work of Christopher H. Bidmead. I'm going to name as many of them as I can on the other side of the break.
Yeah, good. Yeah, they're tree mouse, all that kind of stuff. But I know this, but you can see some things are working slightly against what JNT wants, and they're trying to hem Tom Baker in. Meglos sits uneasily, but I think what makes it work is that it's because it's a program going through massive change.
The biggest sin is a moment that borders on self-parody, has no business being in a program that is trying to get serious. It's when Brotadak is counting down to the destruction of Tygella at the end of part 4, and the countdown changes whenever he loses his place. That violates every law of physics. You would expect that in a parody comedy movie. You would not expect that in a show that's trying to be serious. It just completely breaks the fourth wall. I loved it as a kid though because it's a cute. I think Broderick is a fun performance,
Oh my goodness, it's so good.
and the fact that he's so inept that the countdown actually changes to match his losing his place.
Yeah, the face is you got the face, and it's a bit of a dumb joke. I think you're setting yourself up for trouble if you call a character bad actor because you don't know what you're going to get. And that actor took it very well, and as it turned out, was a fantastic actor. Unbelievably, apparently he always played posh people. He was always playing captains and officers and all this kind of stuff. And this is probably one of the only roles where he played at the sort of grunt, for want of a better word. But like his face, there's obviously the face he makes when he sees the cactus, which is this sort of like, ooh, sort of pinched face. But the funniest one is when they're on board that terrible spaceship and the Meglos doctor produces this tiny dodecahedron and says, "This is better than a coat." And the look on his face is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in Doctor Who. He's so, Frederick Trees is so funny.
When I was 12, I was emotionally invested in him getting the coat. He really wanted the coat.
Yeah, that's so funny.
And of course, he ends up getting destroyed in it, which I guess.
Well, yeah.
However, again, I think there's a lot of fun things about this story, and I think it's a story that you can enjoy. You just have to turn off every single critical thinking skill that you possess.
Yeah.
And again, Terrence in the book fixes some things like Bill Fraser would only appear in this story if he had a chance to kick the canine prop. I don't know if that was in the script or if that was an ad lib. Terrence does not put it in the novelization, and rightfully so. And then, of course, a few books earlier and a few stories later, you have somebody throw the canine prop off of a spaceship. And then Bill Fraser comes back in Canine and Company as one of the bad guys. So I guess Bill Fraser just had it written into his contract that wherever Canine was, he had to be there to stand against our favorite robot dog.
That's woefully disrespectful. I'm Team K9 all the way. If you don't like K9, get out. What's wrong? Go and watch Buck Rogers, which was on the other side, which of course the BBC were in a fight with. Are you going to be doing K9 and Company as on? Is it a numbered target novel that's going to get the official Doctor Who novels treatment?
It is not a numbered target novel, but it was a target release. So it's part of the 3-book Companions of Doctor Who cycle. I am going to be covering it.
Yes.
I have never read, I'll tell you, I've never read any of the 3 Companions books. I own all 3. I have never read Turlough and the Earthling Dilemma. I have never read Harry Sullivan's War. And I have never read K9 and Company. But that is coming up. That came out the same month as Ambassadors of Death. That is book, in my notation, book 120A. Okay. So I will be covering it in between Ambassadors of Death and the Massacre. Now that is over a year from now because I'm only doing a book a week, and that's more than 52 books away when you include these specials. So I'll be getting to it, but it'll be a while.
Okay.
And I'm told the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, which is the flip side of this show, covering the books in story order, they did K9 and Company a couple of months ago, and they hated it. And one of their guests refused to ever come back for any Terrence Dudley book ever again, which is how I came to be on the Target Doctor Who Book Club episode 4, Black Orchid, because the person I was subbing in for was on a Terrence Dudley boycott.
Wow.
And it's all thanks to K9 and Company, the book. And of course, many people were on a Terrence Dudley directing boycott, which is why he never directed Doctor Who again after Meglos.
Wow. Amazing. Well, I look forward to hearing that. I don't know if you've got someone assigned for that, but I would nominate Cy Hart if he's not on it already, because he could bring the party to that.
I do have somebody soft penciled in for that, but
whoever it is will be very, very lucky. That's going to be good.
And speaking of Flanagan and McCulloch, they actually were invited back to write for the show again, even after this story. And they were commissioned to write the first Peter Davison story to open season 19. It didn't work. They got removed from their responsibilities. I assume they were still living in the Logopolis house. And that actually resulted in the happy accident of Christopher H. Bidmead coming back as a freelancer after having resigned. And he comes in, and it's the middle story of the season 19 production block, the 4th out of 7 produced. He comes back to belatedly write Peter Davison's first story, Castrovalva, and he ends up concluding the trilogy that he had begun by writing half of Keeper of Traken and all of Logopolis. So because these guys were so inept, it creates the happy accident of Castrovalva. Next week's book's also one of my favorites. And you don't get the awesomeness that is Castrovalva and the awesomeness that is Paddy Kingsland's score for Castrovalva, which is incredible, and the awesomeness that is Michael Sheard coming back again on Doctor Who. And that doesn't happen if you don't have Flanagan and McCulloch being fired, because their follow-up to Meglos was even worse than Meglos.
Oh dear. Bless them.
So, Conrad, we are just about at the end of the hour. We have not talked much about the book. We've both said good things about the book in passing. I will address a lot of those points on the other side of the break. But I want to give you the last word about Meglos, about Season 18, about the book, anything you want to discuss about the story. Let's hear it.
Thank you so much. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the wonderful things about Meglos is how it sits in Season 18. It starts with, you see K9, still his seawater defences, has damaged him. Lala's still in her lovely Leisure Hive outfit. And it ends with the call to Gallifrey. So I love the fact that it's part of Season 18. And in doing this podcast, it unlocked so many memories about what it was like to be a fan then. So if I may, for each story, I actually managed to think of a particular very, very cool thing that happened at the time. So first of all, when Meglos aired, Doctor Who Weekly, a little comic that I used to subscribe to, turned into Doctor Who Monthly, which is basically the format of the magazine that all these years later we still buy now. In the first Doctor Who Monthly, to carry the neon logo, it had Meglos on the front cover. It was bright yellow, and it had a competition in it to win the single of the brand new Peter Howell theme tune. And you had to do a crazy caption competition to a scene from the Leisure Hive. I entered this competition, and through the post a few weeks later, I got this letter that I'm holding up now, which is a neon logo at the top. It says, "Dear reader, congratulations, you have won a prize in our Doctor Who record competition. We hope that you'll continue to enjoy the Doctor's adventures in time and space. So best wishes, Alan Mackenzie, the editor of Doctor Who magazine." And I won this single, which I'm holding up now.
Wow, look at that.
So amazing. So this was...
I'll just read that. I'm going to read that out because no one else is going to be able to see this. The front cover says BBC Records, and it's Season 18 Tom Baker before he got sick. It's got the neon tube logo in yellow, outlined in blue, and the title is Theme from the BBC TV series. And on the backside, Side 1, Doctor Who, Ron Grainer, eerie music, theme from the BBC series, arranged by Peter Howell. Side 2, The Astronauts, Peter Howell and the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. I don't think I know what that is.
Well, you're about to, because after I finish, you think that's something. I've got something for each story, so I'm probably going to be babbling quite a lot in excitement while throwing bits of merchandise around. But basically, we'll come back to the Astronauts. So that was, let's say, my Leisure Hive experience, this particular music. And it was the first time I think I won anything. And it was certainly the first time that I wrote to Doctor Who magazine. And certainly, I'm 9 years old. I'm not getting mail or letters. To get a letter with Doctor Who and this single was absolutely incredible. For Meglos, the thing that reminded me is that at the time, Madame Tussauds in London did a very special Doctor Who exhibit featuring Tom Baker in his season 18 costume and him in his Meglos gear, covered in cacti. So he was one of the first people to be in Madame Tussauds twice. They also had K9, a TARDIS. They had Naimon Famazi. They also had, which I completely didn't realise, and it wasn't there at the time because I actually got to go to the exhibition, but they had a Lalla Ward. Ward, they made a model of her, and I've actually got a couple of pictures of it, which I'll drop in the show notes or on Twitter. And my dad did a trip to London, and we went there. And he goes, "Where do you want to go?" And I was like, "I want to go to Madame Tussauds and see that Doctor Who stuff." So I actually got to see Meglos in person, as a kid, and see these things. So that was absolutely extraordinary. Moving on, full circle. I remember being in Woolworths and I bought a Viewmaster, which for our younger viewers or younger listeners, a Viewmaster thing is a red plastic sort of camera thing. You put in a circular reel of little film in it, and when you look through it, you can see a sort of 3D stereoscopic picture, which kind of blows your mind. It was like the VR of our day.
I had the
You
Viewmaster
had
with
those, right?
distinctive red plastic binoculars, and
That's the one.
I had a National Parks of America disc, and I had
Wow.
I believe a Looney Tunes Roadrunner and Coyote disc.
Amazing.
Memory serves me right.
Full Circle was like a combination of those two things. It was sort of, you had all the lovely scenery, the lovely stuff, but you also had, and it was one of the first times I could actually, you had pictures in a magazine, but to see 3D colour, slightly scratchy, pictures of the TARDIS and the sets and the costumes and everything was mind blowing. And this is sort of pocket money stuff from Woolworths. So that was an amazing Full Circle experience. For State of Decay, and I think you might have mentioned this on the episode, again from Woolworths, good old Woolworths, for my pocket money, I had the tape of Tom Baker reading State of Decay, which I think is probably on the season 18 Blu-ray or something.
Right, and it was not the novelization by Terrence Hicks, but a different text.
Ah, right, yeah, it was certainly crammed down to a short amount. Yeah.
Yeah, Denise mentioned that when she was here as my
Yeah.
State of Decay guest. That was the episode that launched the infamous hate mail that I got about being a ghastly woke zombie.
Oh yeah, I love
Great
that.
episode.
I must get a T-shirt. Ghastly Work Zombies. Love you. So that was very cool for State of Decay. So far, I'm managing to sort of, something very cool is happening that sort of coincides with each story. For Warrior's Gate, I mean, obviously he sees the exit of K9, and there was a lot of publicity about K9 leaving. Was he staying? Campaigns, all this kind of stuff. But in Doctor Who magazine, you could send off for a K9 sweatshirt, which I am wearing a reproduction of.
That's
now.
Right.
This isn't the actual one. I know Cy Hart had this as well, and I know Cy Hart will have a lot of, will know a lot about. I bet he had a very similar. He'll be nodding in recognition at a lot of this stuff. But I remember wearing a K9 sweatshirt, which made me feel very cool when I was 9, and still makes me feel cool now. For Keeper of Traken, brought back the memory of seeing Melka at the Longleat Doctor Who exhibition, along with Argolins and Famazi and Gundans and Laszlo and stuff from season 18. So you could see all of that stuff there. And I think, obviously, you had the Target novels coming out, and I know Cy mentioned he got his copy of Full Circle in a Target competition. So, I was doing competitions with the magazine, he was doing competitions with the Target novel. But then at the end of the season, I'd obviously enjoyed it so much. And having read the magazine, I knew who John Nathan Turner was and what a producer was. And so I wrote to the Doctor Who production office and sent in drawings and ideas and all this kind of stuff. And again, I got a letter through the post, probably emboldened by my success with the single. And I got this letter from June, from the ancient. This is before they got, JNT brought in the sort of proper TARDIS logo Doctor Who stationery. I'll read it out. It's dated 16th of June 1981, so it's probably I would have written to him just after Logopolis. This was a couple of months later. Dear Conrad Westmaas, thank you for your recent letter and kind comments. I note your suggestions with interest. God only knows what that would have been. Probably bring back K9. Do this, don't that. I enclose a selection of autographed postcards of the regular cast. I'm afraid there are none of Peter Davison at the moment. I enjoyed your drawings of the monster and scene from Logopolis. Yours sincerely, John Nathan Turner.
Oh, wow. So let's see that again, because I want to see the secretarial. Hold it up a little more.
Yeah.
So it's, okay. So it's Jane Judge is the person who typed that letter, because it has her initials.
Beautiful. There it is, still there. And then most excitingly, I got sent these postcards, 3 of which are, so basically I'm holding up postcards of Matthew Waterhouse, Janet Fielding, Sarah Sutton and Anthony Ainley, signed, each of them signed.
Oh, wow. So Anthony Ainley is standing in front of the Logopolis control room. Sarah Sutton is standing on Traken, wearing her tiara. Oh, no, that's the Logopolis control room, sorry.
Yeah.
Janet also on set on Logopolis.
Best of British, Janet Fielding.
And that is Matthew Waterhouse. That is probably Black Park from Full Circle, unless it was on location for Logopolis.
Yeah, and this is so over the course of, beforehand in the 70s, there was very scant stuff. So the stuff I tended to get were the wonderful tea cards and promotional cards you got on cereal packets. But I know I've sort of babbled through all this stuff, but basically, this is giving you, Doctor Who has never done before, is giving you a completely 360 way of kind of interacting with the program. You know, you can now listen to it. I'm wearing it. I can go and see the props and costumes and all this kind of stuff. And I think the key thing for me was knowing that the experience of writing to the people who make it and then getting something back. And I was right on cue. JNT had these new companions in. I loved Romana, but these teenagers, as a 10-year-old, I'd now just turned 10. Teenagers would like someone who was 18 was the most sophisticated and cool person you can imagine. So I hero worshipped Adric, and you know, Nissa and Tegan. I loved them. So I just sort of, you know, I just think this was the season that certainly made me a fan, and it also made me realize that I could not only see things or listen to stuff or buy stuff. And again, we weren't like particularly well off. This is mostly pocket money or free stuff, you know, that you're sending away for. But I think this was the season that made me realize that it was a bit of a two-way door. I could kind of interact with the program a little bit. And boy, was I going to write to production a lot over the years and, you know, get involved in it in all kinds of ways over the years. So thank you for bearing with me with that. There was a kind of breathless dump of kind of like all the cool stuff that was going on. But that's sort of my excitement of season 18 and also what it felt like at the time. You know, this Doctor Who had changed so much, and obviously season 18 changed the program so much, but it's this palpable sense of newness of the 1980s and Doctor Who. It was neon and perspex and video and BBC Micro and synthesizers, which for me is crystallized in this bit of a track that I'd like to play, which is the B-side that you pointed out, The Astronauts by Peter Howell, which I think for me sums up the feeling of season 18 and Doctor Who in the 1980s.
So let's play the clip. That is an incredible audio. I have never heard that before.
Yeah, that takes you. Anyone who's been through the 80s, that's what the 80s sounded like. And to me, that's what newness still sounds like, which is why I'm probably less familiar with new, quote, 2005 era Doctor Who, and why I'm still raving about the newness of season 18, because to me, that's what new sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I respect and admire much of the new series, but because I started watching the classic series when I was 11, 12, and because of where I was when I was reading the books, it's always going to have the bigger place in my consciousness. So I get a lot more enjoyment out of watching a bad classic series story like Meglos, which has a lot of things that I really enjoy, even though it's terrible. I enjoy that more than I enjoy a run-of-the-mill new series story, like something like Vampires of Venice or Ghost Monument, stories that just don't speak to me or engage me in any way. I'd rather watch a bad classic series story that I enjoyed when I was 11 or 12.
And in true doppelganger style, I totally agree. I have to say, like, I probably enjoy about 20% of new Doctor Who. I think is great. But generally, given the choice on any given day, if you're going to say, would you like to watch what we'll call new series, or do you want to watch Meglos? I'll go, stick Meglos on.
And that's why I have a small listenership, but a very devoted listenership. And Conrad, I cannot thank you enough for being such a big part of my audience and a big part of my show.
Thank you so much. It's always a thrill to be on these things, and in the illustrious company of all your wonderful other guests. And thank you so much. Keep turning the pages. Can I say it? Thanks.
Oh, you can say it. Say it again. Yes.
Great.
All right. So I promised you that we were going to reenact the Chronic Hysteresis segment. We've seen it enough times. I'm sure we have it committed to memory. I'll start by being Romana. I'll start us off. Oh, blast. Here we go again.
What's the matter?
Now his probe circuit's jammed.
Oh, that's easy. Just waggle his tail.
Why not? We've tried everything else.
Thank you, mistress. Repairs complete.
Oh, that was amazing. Oh, great. All right, Conrad, we've definitely brought it home.
Wow.
Where else can we hear you coming up, or where can we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, if it's still standing, at hairofthehound_, and you can find me on an upcoming Trap 1, The Amazing World of Doctor Who audio annual. It's going to be quite a trip. Don't miss it. Thank you so much.
All right, Conrad, we'll talk real soon. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Josie's on a rocket ride. Pussycats are by her side. Baby is the kooky guy. Come along and take the chase. With the pussycats in outer space. The pussycats in outer space. Yeah.
Doctor Who, Meglos, by Terrence Dix. Televised as Meglos, teleplay by John Flanagan and Andrew McCulloch, televised in September and October 1980, paperback release date May 5th, 1983, target book number 75, cover artist Andrew Skilleter. Zastor, leader of the planet Tygella, rules a divided people. Savants and Dions are irrevocably opposed on one crucial issue, the dodecahedron, mysterious source of all their power. To the Savants, the dodecahedron is a miracle of science to be studied, observed, and used to benefit Tygellan civilization. To the Dions, it is a god and not to be tampered with. When the power supply begins to fluctuate wildly, the whole planet is threatened, but the Tygellans cannot agree how they should deal with the problem. Zastor welcomes the arrival of the Doctor and invites him to arbitrate, but the Dions are suspicious of the Time Lord, and perhaps rightly so. It seems wrong to be saying goodbye to Tom Baker so early. This is the 38th and final Tom Baker novelization of the original Target run, all coming in less than a decade, and the Target line has roughly another decade to go in its original form after May 1983. With this being book 75 of the run, we're not even halfway through the series yet, by book count. Now, the three missing stories, all written or co-written for TV by Douglas Adams, that's The Pirate Planet, City of Death, and Shada, in chronological order, but not quality order, would not come out as novelizations until the 2010s, and then as hardbacks, with belated Target-length cutdowns of Pirate Planet and City of Death even later than that. Now, I suppose you're saying to yourself, but Jason, what about the Pescatons? To which I respond, what about the Pescatons? Yes, that is a Target book. Yes, it will feature on this program, and yes, it is based on a Tom Baker Doctor Who story, albeit an audio adventure from back in the vinyl days. And yes, Jason, you ask, you're a child of the 70s. Aren't you still living in the vinyl days? Yes, I am. But even the Pescatons, which, fun fact, I own but have never actually read, comes out almost a decade after Meglos, so this is the final Tom Baker book for a very, very long time, both in real time and on this podcast. Meglos is the Tom Baker era going out not with a bang but a whimper. April 1983 is just about when the Five Doctors, Baker's last on-screen appearance in the classic series, wrapped principal photography, although Tom himself famously declined to participate somewhat late in the production process and appears via only 2 scenes recycled from Shada, or, if you're one of those Five Doctors special edition people, just the 1 scene. Meglos is also, how shall we say this, not Tom's best story. This is not Tom Baker's fault, of course. He is playing the bad guy, which he only got to do 3 times in 7 seasons. But in Android Invasion, his robot double features only in a scene or 2, and in Invasion of Time, his villainy is a ruse revealed before the halfway point of the story. Here, Baker goes all out as Meglos, and it's glorious. But the rest of the script is ludicrous, and Terrence is here to tell us why, throwing deadly shade at the story via a book that may be just a slim 120 pages of text, but is worth its weight in noisy eye-rolling at Flanagan and McCulloch's plot logic. With the Meglos novelization, only being 120 pages of text, I find it fascinating that Terence devotes the first 3 of those pages to describing a scene that's not even on TV. The Gaztac crews landing on Earth to abduct what the TV credits refer to only as the Earthman. In the book, his name is George Morris, and he plays a humdrum, ordinary, workaday man who gets abducted while walking home to his wife who has supper ready. This seems a bit inspired by the disappearance of Mr. Hollis in Terence's own novelization of The Three Doctors. You know what else is inspired? Conrad's guest reading of those 3 pages. Let's go.
People disappear. There's nothing illegal about walking out of your old life, changing your name, getting another job in another town or another country. Sometimes there may be a more sinister explanation. In criminal circles, people have been known to drop out of sight and never reappear. There are rumours that the concrete pilings that support some of our new motorways are hiding grisly secrets. Even in a small country like England, there are wild stretches where a body can be hidden and never found. Some disappearances have far stranger explanations, like the disappearance of George Morris. Mr. Morris was an assistant bank manager in a small country town. Tall, slim, with horn-rimmed glasses and pleasant open face, he was about as average a specimen of his kind as you could wish to find. He was fortunate in that he lived close to his work. Most days he didn't even take the car. 20 minutes brisk walking across the common took him from the front door of the little high street bank, across a pleasantly wild and unspoiled common, and up to the front door of the big house in a quiet country lane. On this particular evening he telephoned his wife just before he left the bank and told her, as he told her every weekday evening, that he would be home in 20 minutes. Mrs. Morris said, "Yes, dear," went to the drinks cabinet and poured him a glass of medium dry sherry. 20 minutes later she would hear his key in the lock. Sometimes she found herself wishing George would be a little less predictable. As it happened, George Morris's life was about to become very unpredictable indeed. He strode briskly out of the town, across the common, and followed his usual path, which led through a clump of trees down into the little hollow and then on home. It was a fine summer evening. He wasn't taking work home, so he was quite unencumbered. No raincoat, no brolly, not even a briefcase, and he marched smartly through the green countryside, a faintly incongruous figure in his dark business suit. At the top of the little hollow, he stopped in utter astonishment. There was a square metal shape squatting there in the centre of the hollow. At close range it looked enormous, the size of a small building. It seemed to be made of heavy steel plates, scarred and pitted with rust. Morris walked cautiously up to it. There was a clanking, grinding sound, and a door slid open in the side. A group of men came out, extraordinary men in wild, barbaric, vaguely military-looking clothes. The leader was big-bellied and bearded, with cunning little eyes in a piggy face. The man behind him was taller, with a stubble of grey beard on his chin. More men appeared, tough, savage-looking types with oddly shaped weapons in their belts. To Morris's indignation, 2 of them darted round behind him, gripping his arms. He struggled wildly, but found he was quite helpless. "What's going on?" he demanded indignantly. "Is this some kind of student rag?" No one answered. The burly, bearded one, obviously the leader, studied Morris thoughtfully, as if checking him off against some mental specification. Then he nodded. The tall, thin one took a small silver cylinder from his pocket and pressed it to Morris's neck. Immediately, Morris became quiet and still. He was more or less asleep on his feet as they led him into the spaceship. Slowly, lumberingly, the ship took off. It gathered speed. Dwindling rapidly, it shot up into the summer sky, then vanished completely as it entered hyperspace. Morris remained under electronic sedation for the long voyage across the galaxy. It was when he awoke that the nightmare really began.
That bit about the grisly secrets in the motorways is pretty intense for a book aimed at kids. Love that. Another 3 pages after the intro are a very long introduction to the TARDIS and its occupants, with Terence throwing in lots of editorial remarks. The TARDIS was, quote, the property of, or at least it was currently in the possession of, a wandering renegade Time Lord known as the Doctor. The Doctor, as he repairs K9, following on from the end of The Leisure Hive, episode 69 of this podcast, whistles an old Martian lullaby, which is a callback to many similar lines from the Pertwee novelization era. For some reason, Terence writes, Romana found all this very irritating. So it's 5 full pages into the book before Terence gets to any dialogue from the TV production. Sounds like somebody was stalling as long as he could before getting to the script. The first TARDIS scene sees Terence use the words irritation, exasperation, scatterbrained, baffling. That sets the table quite nicely. Page 14, the first scene on Tygella, uses the word inexplicable. That being said, Terence does a good job in Chapter 1 of setting up Tygellan civilization and the workings of the dodecahedron. Easy breezy exposition, and another way of delaying the actual arrival of the plot. Chapter 2, on page 17, Zastor, leader of the Tygellans, as he does on TV, cruelly mocks Diedrichs the Savant by lamenting, "So much for science." Terence knows this line is a terrible introduction to an important character, so immediately jumps in with, quote, "Even as he spoke, Zastor knew the criticism was unfair." Terence also changes the Doctor's line when a malfunctioning K9 misgenders him from, "That's a promising start," to, on page 25 of the book, quote, "Not the most promising start." Page 27, the gas tax are introduced properly after their brief appearance in Chapter 1. Terence must have watched the video of this and gets right to work telling us, the reader, just how heavily he rolled his eyes. General Grugger wears, quote, "an extraordinary hat on his head, a cross between a Roman helmet and a flower pot, all jeweled and spiked." This Gaztac band is, quote, "perhaps smaller than most, as evidently the season 18 budget didn't extend to as many extras as you would think should populate a pirate crew." Page 31, Grugger, quote, "hadn't the faintest idea what any of Meglos' equipment was for." And to be fair, I like the dialogue between Meglos and the Gaztacs in Chapter 3, and Terence presents it all, so that's a plus. On page 43, Grugger's realization that he should not betray Meglos until, quote, he was sure it would be absolutely safe, is also Terence plumbing an imaginary character's innermost thoughts and finding pure gold deep within. Chapter 4 ends with a brief scene, not on TV, where Meglos finishes fine-tuning his Tom Baker disguise and exits his citadel. Just because I think the story is not suitable for more than a who-happy 12-year-old who doesn't care what episode he's watching. Whoops. Sorry. Projecting there. This doesn't mean that Terence doesn't add his usual value with his trademark array of asides and embellishments. The Dion sacrificial rock on page 55 had, quote, "ominous rusty brown stains, though no one ever referred to them," end quote. It also helps that the story contains a meditation on the relative merits of scientific exploration versus blind faith. Oh wait. No. Check that. Meditation is too lofty a word for this story. Let's say the story contains characters who exhibit trends of scientific exploration and blind faith. And Terence, working from a script that was edited by Christopher H. Bidmead, there are echoes of Logopolis in this. Zastor, like the Monitor, being an old friend of the Doctor, and Meglos redimensioning the dodecahedron, the same way the Master tampers with the workings of Logopolis and redimensions the TARDIS. Not to mention the line in Part 2 of Logopolis, and Part 3 of Meglos, of a character willing to help, quote, "in the ordinary way." When all this is happening on screen, such as Chapter 5 when Meglos insinuates himself into the power room, Terence stops mocking and just tells a neat little story. Similarly, the attack on Romana in Chapter 6 is a lot more interesting than a clumsy 1980 vintage studio effort to animate a carnivorous plant. Page 60. The scientific part of Romana's mind was registering an interesting attack method evolved by the carnivorous plant, One end of it tied up the prey, and the other knocked it out. At the same time, the more practical side of her nature led her to struggle frantically until she had wrenched the bell plant from her head. But then again, Terence simply does not catch the delicious intensity with which Frederick Treves delivers the Part 2 cliffhanger line. Let's give a listen.
She's seen too much! Kill her!
The character of Brodadak, and Conrad may have mentioned this earlier, was famously named as an anagram or a near anagram of bad actor. There are, like I said, lots of anagrams in Bidmead's one season of Doctor Who, along with Tremas, and Adric, and Fomassi. Treves is woefully miscast. Woefully miscast in a bad actor part, that's for sure. He's one of the best things about this story, far and away. In Chapter 7, Terence leans into the stupidity of the gas tax. Well, not just Chapter 7, he does that all book. Now, maybe you love a Doctor Who story where the stupidity of the bad guys is the story's operating principle, but on page 71, Romana, quote, illustrated this nonsense, that's right, Terence calls it nonsense, by drawing mystic circles in the air above her head. Fortunately for Romana, the gas tax, though ferocious, were far from bright, end quote. Terence really enjoys writing for this George Morris character, who reappears on page 82. Quote, ordinary and everyday as he was, George Morris, the Earthling, as Meglos called him, had unexpected reserves of strength and courage. He didn't really know what was happening around him, but on some level he was sure that his body and his soul had been invaded, taken over by some alien force. He was fighting for survival, and he brought Meglos to the very edge of defeat. Terence also does not include a bit of unscripted business inserted at the behest of Bill Fraser, General Grugger, the kicking of the K9 prop. The book benefits from that omission. Chapter 9 is one of Terence's micro-affairs, a 5-page chapter, mostly devoted to Barbara Lex's, attempted sacrifice of the Fourth Doctor to Ty. That sacrifice is identical, just about beat for beat, to the same attempted sacrifice late in Underworld, not a story that you really want to be borrowing from. And even Terence has the Doctor reflect that all this is very familiar. But Terence really does seem to revel in pointing out just how pathetic the gas tax are. Page 90. Triumphantly, the surviving handful of gas tax marched back through the jungle, leaving the sound of blaster fire behind them. After all, they'd sacked a city. Well, a city gate, at least. And they'd looted and pillaged, if you could dignify stealing from the pockets of a few dead guards and their own dead comrades with such grandiose terms. Anyway, they'd seen a bit of action and come off more or less victorious, and they were still alive, even if most of their fellows were doomed. Still, that was their bad luck. On the next page, 91, Romana reflects that Karis' story of having been abducted by Meglos, still LARPing as Tom Baker, made, quote, very little sense. And I will confess, as much as I harsh on the story, on some level, yes, I'm always going to be the 12-year-old boy I was when I first saw this on TV, and I identified hard with Brodadak and his little man crush on Tom Baker's coat. Terence seems to appreciate this as well, dipping in and out of the thoughts of the adorable little old man and his murdering band of pirates. Page 97, Brodadak, essentially a simple soul. Page 99, Brodadak looked on with the simple pleasure of a child watching a favorite magician perform a conjuring trick. Chapter 10 is a mere 8 pages long, but contains extra material not on TV, a longer appearance for the guard who recognizes that the Doctor being sacrificed to Ty is not in fact Meglos, and an actual moment to explain why Karis and Diedrichs chose to join the Doctor and Romana on Zalfathora. As to Chapter 11, Conrad, as usual, is exactly right. Terence expands so much upon the TV material. Now, not in the sense that he gives us a Malcolm Hulke-like mini-bio of General Grugger's life of heartbreak and failure, but he does give extra dialogue to Meglos and more backstory to the Zalfathorans to explain how they evolved, why they developed the dodecahedron, how the dodecahedron wound up on Tygella. Terence also makes the plot point of Brodadak and the Doctor's coat much more clear, adding several lines. And General Grugger is much more ept. Ept, is that a word? The opposite of inept? In the book, page 103, Meglos was working at his main control console, with Grugger and Brodadak looking on. Both were watching Meglos' every move, Brodadak out of simple fascination and admiration, Grugger for a very different reason, all his own. And page 110. So I've got all this figured out. We don't need him, Meglos, anymore. Put the coat on. Grugger waited tensely. If Brodadak put the coat on, it would mark the end of his loyalty to Meglos, and the end of Meglos as well. Unable to resist it, Brodadak slipped his arms in the sleeves, shrugged his shoulders into it. Strong characterization, delivered so concisely that you might not even have noticed it the first time. But it adds enough context to clarify what seemed so frivolous or unimportant on TV. Chapter 12 is called Final Countdown. And yes, I totally know what you're singing to yourself right now. This relates to the rather infamous bit on TV where the countdown to the destruction of Tygella changes whenever Brodadak loses his place. Let's play that, but first, a little bit of Tom Baker doing what he does best, arguing with himself.
3 meters by 5 meters. And I could have had the galaxy. The universe.
Yes. I've often puzzled about that.
What?
Well, why a good-looking chap like you should want to control the universe.
Why?
Yes, I mean, it baffles me, this burning ambition to... Burning?
It's beyond your comprehension.
Oh, absolutely, Bernie.
Doctor! Oh, good heavens.
16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9,
It's time to sing out a thorough overhaul.
7, 6, 5,
They're moving.
4, what 5?
The laboratory is sinking.
Sinking 4, 5, 4.
Stop the countdown.
But the clock's dead.
Stop the clock.
Right, it must be this button.
Stop the countdown.
But the clock's
Stop the clock.
right, it must be this button.
Stop.
Page 119, Terence writes, Meglos, quote, took refuge in his favorite arrogant expression, "It is beyond your comprehension." George Morris returns on the next page. He had a pleasant open face in the bit Conrad narrated for us earlier. Isn't Conrad the best? And Morris has a pleasant everyday sort of face here. Terence is back on familiar ground on page 124 with a reference to Gallifrey, a planet he helped create. Quote, the Doctor looked grave. Whenever he went back to Gallifrey, home planet of his people, the Time Lords, he always seemed to end up in a great deal of trouble. Still, perhaps this time would be different. Terence, by the way, ends up writing that next trip to Gallifrey, at least in the novelization form, and spoiler alert, next time would not be different. Terence devotes most of the last 4 pages to giving us George Morris's point of view, again with virtually the same final line of dialogue from 3 Doctors, in a book-only scene where Morris arrives back home right on time. And Terence really has fun exploring Morris's thoughts on what it might have been like to be abducted, which we didn't get on TV. Page 124, the final paragraph. The Doctor turned to Morris, who was looking considerably better now, though he still had a permanent expression of mild bemusement. The Doctor and Romana had done their best to explain what had happened to him. Very sensibly, Morris had taken the attitude that it was all impossible, but since it had all happened, he had better accept it and forget about it. All Morris wanted now was to get back home and resume his normal life. He swore he would never again complain about the dullness of being an assistant bank manager. And that line, by the way, similar to the final line of the android invasion, is probably Terence saying, yes, anything is better than having to write this book. Next time on Doctor Who Literature, we begin a 10-part series on Peter Davison, because the next 10 novelizations in publication order are all Peter Davison stories. That is going to take up 11 weeks of the program. We do have our season break between the 1983 books and the 1984 books. For my newer listeners, I take 1 week off in between every 2 years worth of books. I call that a season because Spotify for podcasters likes you to have seasons to your podcast. And I do a bonus episode. Here we are going to have a bonus episode that is devoted to certain aspects of what may be Peter Davison's best television story. In fact, what may be the greatest classic series Doctor Who television story of all time. That 10-part series begins next week, fittingly enough, with the novelization of Peter Davison's first televised serial, Castrovalva. Joining me is a man who has the same 24 hours in the day that I do, that you do, but does so much more with them. He's been a Doctor Who fan for over 40 years. He was a very important figure in my years on Records Doctor Who. He has written several nonfiction books about the program. He hosts one of the gold standard Doctor Who podcasts. He is Graham Burke. He is one of the masterminds behind Reality Bomb. I am happy to call him friend. Graham is joining us next week talking about one of his favorite books, and mine, the Christopher H. Bidmead novelization of Castrovalva. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. This podcast is produced by David Barsky, Jim Sangster, and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Conrad Westmaas. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.